Hey everybody, what's up? It's your host Jesse Morgan and welcome to What in the Paranormal? Alright, this week we've got one of the four horsemen of Bigfoot, who are considered the four horsemen of Bigfoot, or the sometimes referred to as the giants in the Bigfoot field. So these four individuals, John Green, Peter Byrne, Professor Grover Krantz, and Rene Dahinden. These four individuals have made immense contributions in a variety of ways to the field of Bigfoot, research, just exploring, and things of that nature. Peter Byrne, he is out in Oregon, and what it looks like is some independent filmmakers are putting together a documentary on Peter Byrne. And I love this because it's so very important that we collect these people on film, kind of tell their stories, but also make sure we don't lose any of the knowledge that they've collected, because we never know how that might point to or connect the dots with something that someone today or maybe in the future finds. Or perhaps you get a fresh eye, a fresh perspective looking through all this documentation they have of all the research they've done over the years. So Peter Byrne, he was actually born in Dublin, Ireland in 1925. He joined the British Royal Air Force in World War II. So he managed a tea plantation that was near the Himalayan mountains. That's kind of where he got started into Bigfoot, or actually in this case the Yeti, because of these stories that the Sherpas were sharing. This is where he just took off with this and has been doing it ever since. Peter Byrne spent approximately 3 years trekking through the Himalayan mountain area investigating the Yeti. He had excellent funding from wealthy investors. So after that, he was hired actually to come to the United States and Pacific Northwest and look for the alleged creature thought to be living there, Bigfoot. I think he was kind of blown away by just how huge the forests were, how thick, how lush they were. Peter Byrne believes that it's a real possibility to successfully hide within those forests. Peter Byrne's written all kinds of successful books about his explorations into Bigfoot over the years. He's found footprints, the noises, hair, and there's human-like shadows that he's filmed. At one point in the 1970s, he actually ran the Bigfoot Information Center. Today, Peter Byrne is a spry 96 years old, and he has not really slowed down too much. He still sets up trail cams. He still goes for walks in the woods. He has thousands of images of animal photos dating all the way back to the 1940s. And this kind of goes back to having this data and keeping it and cataloging it. This is so important. This next story is really interesting as well. In a couple of the previous episodes, I've talked a little bit about possibly the first documented encounter with the men in black, little green men. And these are great stories because we're so familiar with so many of these terms these days that it's great to be able to take a look back and actually go, okay, well, where did this start? Where did this come from? And today I want to talk about, in this episode, classifying UFO close encounters. Imagine it's 1947, September, and we're just coming out of World War II. The Air Force, it's got a problem. It's just getting hammered, crushed with all these reports of these mysterious objects in the sky. So the public's nervous. Who is this another country? Is this possibly the Soviet Union? Who is this? What's going on? But they're unidentified. So the Air Force is like, okay, we got to do something here. We got to figure this out. So it launched an investigation, and that investigation was called Project Sign. Okay, this is pre-Project Blue Book. Now it's about 1948. It's early in the year, and they're kind of making some steps forward, and they're like, okay, we're going to have to go outside the Air Force and find some smart people and try and help us out with this. So what it does is it tracks down an astronomer, and this gentleman, J. Allen Hynek, at the time, he was in his late 30s, and he was the director at Ohio State University's Macmillan Observatory. Hynek had already worked for the government during World War II. He helped develop new defense technologies, including first radio-controlled fuse. So he's already got this security clearance built in. It's still active. And that makes it a lot easier on the government to kind of get this process going and bring him in on this project. So he's at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base one day, right? He wrote later on in one of his books that these gentlemen came up to him and according to him with some obvious embarrassment, and they brought up the subject of flying saucers and asked if he would care to serve as a consultant to the Air Force on that. He was about to begin this lifelong adventure, and that would turn him into one of the most famous and at times controversial scientists in the 20th century. In 1948, he had scarcely heard of UFOs. As he stated, like most scientists, assumed they were nonsense. Project Sign itself ran for a year, and the team reviewed just over 230 cases. And Hynek, in his final report, noted that about 32% of the incidents could be attributed to astronomical phenomena. Okay, well, another 35% had other explanations. You know, your typical stuff: balloons, rockets, birds, things like that. Of the remaining 33%, 13% didn't offer enough evidence to yield an explanation. That left 20% that provided investigators, you know, with some evidence that still could not be explained. The Air Force really wasn't too keen on using the term unidentified flying object. So that 20% that didn't have a readily available answer to explain it, they would just classify it as unidentified. Very simple. The report was issued at the end of 1949. It concluded that phenomena posed no danger to the United States, having resulted from mass hysteria, deliberate hoaxes, mental illness, conventional objects, those birds, you know, misinterpretation, and it also suggested that the subject wasn't even worth bothering with at that point. But these UFO incidents are still continuing, right? And now the Air Force is getting these really interesting reports from its own radar operators. The national media has actually jumped on board, and they're kind of taking it more seriously. Life magazine did a cover story in 1952, and there's a widely respected TV journalist, Edward Murrow, and he devoted a program to the topic, including an interview with Kenneth Arnold. And this is the pilot who in 1947 had a sighting of these mysterious objects over Mount Rainier in Washington State, which is also kind of where the term flying saucer began as well, or it was popularized at that point as well. So at this point, the Air Force is like, all right, so they revive Project Grudge, but that kind of evolved into what is now what we're very familiar with as Project Blue Book. This is where Mr. Hynek gets back into the game, okay? So he joins Project Blue Book in 1952, and he'd stay with it until it closed down in 1969. Mr. Hynek's role was similar to previous. You know, his job is to review the reports of UFO sightings, determine whether or not there's a, we'll say, logical astronomical explanation, and as he talked about it, he said it's a lot of grind work and a lot of paperwork, but every now and then he'd come across something interesting, and this would give him the chance to go out into the field, and this is where things kind of change for him. So Mr. Hynek gets out into the field, and this is where you can really see the difference between, you know, going on and reading files online, reading this documentation, which is definitely important, but getting out into the field and actually meeting and talking with witnesses. He talks about how, yeah, they could have been lying, they could have been insane, they could have been hallucinating, but he talks about how he doesn't think so. And this was in one of his books that he published in 1977, the Hynek UFO Report. He talks about how they're standing in the community, or their lack of motive for the perpetration of a hoax, their own puzzlement at the turn of events they believe that they've seen, their incredible reluctance to not even want to talk about what happened at all. He felt that this led to a very subjective reality to their UFO experience. Hynek, basically for the rest of his life, is really going to deplore the ridicule that a lot of people have gotten and perhaps still get for reporting a UFO sighting, which of course is causing people to never want to come forward because of that. So there's possibly a lot of really good information out there that we've just never heard of. If you want to dive deeper into this, there is another book out there, Dr. Hynek co-authored with Jacques Vallée, something called The Edge of Reality, a progress report on unidentified flying objects. And with that, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. You never know what you might see or hear. And thank you for being here. I'm your host, Jesse Morgan, for another episode of What in the Paranormal?